A lot of these walls are in fact fake walls essentially that were put up by the landlord to split up originally larger rooms so that he could pack more people in. These rooms had numerous bunk beds in them, and you often had 8 or 10 tenants on average in each of the rooms in this property. So you had, over the course of the 5 or 6 buildings here, over 140 tenants. If you even look around the room, you'll see, for example, over here in this corner, there's mold that runs right up the wall. So the conditions really were, and indeed still are, tenement-like slum conditions, and are really the kind of conditions that people would, I'm sure, imagine ended 50 years ago as slum clearance properties stopped being slums. But these conditions have returned to Dublin with these slum landlords that have come back in and are packing in as many people as they can to extract as much money in rent as they possibly can. We know that the tenants in these buildings were paying 300, 400, 450 euro each. Given that there was about 140 tenants in these buildings, it does work out in the tens of thousands of euro each month. And of course there is questions that need to be asked on, was the landlord paying tax on all of that? We know that the rent was being paid in cash. He himself was very rarely involved, if ever. Most of the tenants had no idea who he was. Middlemen were used, front companies were used. So the whole thing is shrouded in illegality, essentially. And the very kind of dodgy grey areas of this housing crisis, where people have been left in a situation where really they don't have any serious tenants' rights and are not being treated in the way that I think people would hope people to be treated in the modern age. So essentially over the last few months, a number of different housing groups, many of which have existed for quite a long time, began to meet again. There was a series of housing forums where we were discussing the housing crisis, how it had gotten worse, and how there was kind of a lack of action, and really people felt like there wasn't a huge amount going on. So the agreement that came out of those housing forums is that we needed direct action that would really demonstrate that there was a desire from a lot of people to take the kinds of actions that the government needs to take, that we need to force them to take those actions. Or what eventually came out of that was that we called for the demonstration outside of O'Connell Street. We marched down here, and an occupation took place in which we took over this building, which we feel is really a symbol of how bad the housing crisis has got. And since then have been building and building, new groups have been joining, we've been doing door knocking, and even today we had the demonstration down to the Customs House to demand that Eoghan Murphy come out and give us an answer to our demands.
Murphy, Murphy, Murphy! Leo, Leo, Leo! Leo, Leo, Leo! Murphy, Murphy, Murphy!
Came here today and marched down to the Custom House, and we had a list of demands for Eoghan Murphy, the Housing Minister, who wasn't there, and we demanded that somebody come down and talk to us. Initially they said no, there was nobody about, and we said we wanted to meet him up here, which of course they declined, but one of his representatives came down and spoke to us and said they will give us a time and a date next week, and it'll be no later than 12 noon on Friday, which was part of your demands. And they said if we leave as part of the negotiations, they will guarantee of a day and a time next week.
We've had a huge amount of support. There's been door knocking most evenings since we moved in here, and from what I've heard back from it, it's been almost universal on the door support for what we're doing. Because the local community, clearly, and from what we've heard from them, are aware that what's happening here is part of a broader effort by landlords, by vulture funds, by various bodies in the city to essentially forcefully gentrify this area by running down buildings like this so that they can then be converted into high-level, high-value property that will then be rented out to people not necessarily from the local community, and will really just change this community against its will and end up in a situation in which local people are not able to find housing, in which really anyone who is not very high income will find it very difficult to find housing. That's already the case in large swathes of this city that have seen a lot of forced gentrification. Core to what we've always been trying to do here, and what we've always said, is that this isn't just about us taking the property, this is taking the property to give it back to the community. Last Friday we had a family fun day which had a huge number of local families come along, and we had magicians and there was music, And that's really at the heart of what we're trying to do here, which is to help communities defend themselves and work with communities in defending themselves from parasitic slumlords that are coming into areas and really just have no interest in helping the local people who live here, but rather are just seeking profit for their own ends. We are aware of the limits of what can be achieved in the short term. The reality is that we were not starting from a particularly strong position, even though we're a lot stronger now than we were. As far as we're concerned, and I think this is very important to stress, regardless of what happens to this particular property, this movement was never just about Summerhill. It was never just about, this house and this particular period in time. This is just the beginning. This is the spark to begin our broader movement. And even if we do leave this property, which could well happen, that isn't the end of where we're going. Regardless of what happens here, the fight does go on.